One topic, two guests, two perspectives, one show that gets to the point with the biggest names in business, media, entertainment, and technology. Welcome to The Point with me, Jon Steinberg. On this week's episode of The Point, we take a look at two iconic magazine brands, Playboy and Cosmopolitan, both of which have had a profound influence on the way Americans talk about sex.
I think that the magazine and the organization as an entirety has brought sex out of the closet.
I think, first and foremost, it's liberated women to say they enjoy sex.
In an era where the publishing industry is in a major state of flux and the national conversation on sex and gender is more divided than ever, I talked to the heads of two brands with storied legacies about sex, feminism, and the media.
I think there are a lot of individuals who point at Playboy as an enemy of feminism because it celebrates sexual arousal from the male point of view.
We do talk about sexual fluidity so much more because we know that a much greater number of millennials identify that way.
Playboy, the quintessential men's lifestyle and entertainment magazine. Founded by Hugh Hefner in 1953, he brought nudity to the mainstream magazine racks, but insisted on maintaining a level of sophistication. Hefner hired respected writers to interview luminaries and influencers from the worlds of politics, entertainment, and beyond. Designed to appeal to the sophisticated urban male, the magazine reached the height of its popularity in the early 1970s, with a circulation of over 5 million. Cooper Hefner is Hugh's fourth child, from his marriage to playmate Kimberly Conrad. Cooper grew up in a house near the Playboy Mansion. He has been the chief creative officer of Playboy Enterprises since July 2016. Did you always want to do this? You always loved the magazine. You obviously always loved your father deeply. Did you always want to do this business?
No. If I was not here, I would want to pursue a career in government, in the sense of my love for history as well as politics oftentimes influences what I'm talking about on social media as well as what I'm doing in my free time. The other is that Playboy has historically been involved in the political space because it's been in the business of protecting people's freedoms since its conception. I think the history buff in me really just fell in love with the impact that the brand made, and the idea that we should all be able to live the life that we choose, whether or not our neighbor understands the choices that we make or we understand the choices our neighbor makes. That to me was inherently American, and I love the fact that the brand in the early years fought for that.
And what do you think it means to be a Playboy now?
It's a free-thinking type of guy who enjoys living the best version of himself and is unapologetic about enjoying the finer things in life.
Cosmopolitan launched in 1886 as a family magazine, later turning into a literary magazine, and finally becoming the woman's magazine it is today in 1965. That's when chief editor Helen Gurley Brown joined and remodeled it as a magazine for modern, single career women. Under Brown, Cosmo's mission was to erase the stigma around unmarried women having sex and enjoying it. Since the 60s, the magazine has covered all facets of women's lives: health, fitness, fashion, leadership, and beyond. Michele Promaulayko signed on as editor-in-chief in 2016 and is in charge of establishing the publication's voice in an unprecedented era for its readership. All right, so you get offered this job how long ago?
About 1.5 years.
And when you thought about taking it on, did you have thoughts about defining feminism for yourself and for the publication under your editorship? For
me, it was more that, one, I had a lot of affection and history with the brand. I was the executive editor for 8 years, about 8 years ago. It's iconic. Only 4 other people have sat in the seat that I now sit in, which is extremely daunting and humbling. So I was thinking about those things, and certainly the impact that the brand has on young women. So all of that, but I wouldn't say specifically, defining or redefining feminism.
But did it make you nervous in any way, or do you just fully embrace the topic?
Fully embrace the topic.
Okay.
It didn't make me nervous at all. In fact, I have a game with my friends that's basically try to make me blush. Because it's after being here for so many years, like I've heard it all, written it all.
How has the Me Too movement impacted your publication and your editorial decisions?
It's been a very rich topic for articles and coverage, both digitally and in the print magazine.
You talk about wartime presidents and peacetime presidents, and it seems a bit like you're a bit of a wartime editor-in-chief.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, one of I think, Cosmo's missions, and certainly my mission, is to reunite the sexes. There's so much division. And I'm a big believer in, you know, if we're going to solve some of these problems, we have to do it together. And I'm also a big believer in not treating men as a monolith. There's certainly good guys out there.
Right.
And so trying to bring some of that nuance to
Do you think
the
that's
pages.
part of the Me Too movement? Do you think that the Me Too movement for this publication is about reuniting sexes?
I don't think it's singularly what it's about, but I think it's part of the conversation. And I think sometimes when you're trying to course correct a problem that's been going on for a long time, you kind of over course correct, and then you have to come back to center. And maybe there is a little bit of that happening. I'd rather that than it not happen at all.
There is an important conversation, again, about consent that is happening that is long overdue. I do, however, feel as though there is a movement on the liberal side where there are a number of individuals who are labeling themselves as progressive that are seem very anti-sex and I would even say anti-arousal from the male point of view. I think that wing used to belong to sort of the evangelical Christian movement on the right, but we're living in a really interesting moment where consent should be at the forefront. The abuse of power should also be at the forefront.
Coming up, does sex still sell in the Me Too era?
We do talk about sexual fluidity so much more because we know that a much greater number of millennials identify that way. And they identify that way, I think, both because, one, if they've always felt it, now they can express it. And also there's just more open-mindedness and conversation around that kind of experimentation.
I actually just penned an editorial about the difference between sex and sexism, and encouraging people to not, while we have the important conversation around consent, not make sex the enemy.
Welcome back to The Point. Do magazines that celebrate sex have to change strategies in the Me Too era?
I actually just penned an editorial about the difference between sex and sexism, and encouraging people to not, while we have the important conversation around consent, not make sex the enemy.
You said in a tweet, consensual sexual expression is healthy. Nothing good will come if we volunteer to lead sex back into the closet in the name of a false moral crusade. Tell me what you meant by that tweet.
Well, I meant that I think, how do you continue to make sex something that's fun and a celebration and not end up back in the closet because people are afraid to acknowledge the truth, which is that I think for the most part, men and women approach sex very differently today.
How do men and women approach sex differently?
Well, men and women approach sex differently because I think men are a lot more honest with each other about how men perceive sex. I don't necessarily know that that happens among all women.
What do you think is the appropriate way for people to talk with other people about their sex lives without it being an invasion of the partner or partner's privacy? Like, so the question is, you know, a bunch of men sitting around talking about sex they have with their partners in a locker room. I mean, is there such a thing as a locker room? Is there such a thing for either of the sexes?
Yeah, because by the way, women do it too.
Right. So of course they do.
And they might actually do it more.
And your magazine is in many ways a springboard for that, right? For that kind of discussion.
I mean, I don't know if I'd align it in that way. I mean, certainly we like to start conversations, you know, whether they're just among women or whether it's among couples. I think that that's a difficult question to answer because it really depends on the tone, right? It depends on the tone. It depends on the relationship of the players. Is it your best friend? How well do they know your partner? Again, is it a respectful tone? How detailed are you getting? I mean, there's all that. We do talk about sexual fluidity so much more because we know that a much greater number of millennials identify that way. And they identify that way, I think, both because, one, if they've always felt it, now they can express it. And also there's just more open-mindedness and conversation around that kind of experimentation.
What about your fiance, who's an actress who posed in the magazine as well?
It's not that big of a deal. You know, I think people thinking and feeling it's a big deal is really just, it's fascinating, because I think it ultimately speaks on behalf of the individual's uncomfortability with sex. We had spoken about it, and she penned an editorial commenting on how ridiculous it was that women are not able to grace a cover like Playboy and be topless, but you see a guy on the cover of Men's Health and he's able to do whatever he wants. I mean, specifically be topless, not necessarily be bottomless. But she had some interesting commentary just about sex in society and feminism, and that was paired with the pictorial. But I thought she looked beautiful.
What do people not realize about Cosmo?
I think they don't realize how well-rounded it is and the diversity of topics that we cover. They think of the salacious headlines, cover lines, and they think about its legacy, and they don't think about, you know, all of the various components. We were nominated for a National Magazine Award for a 12-page feature that we did on how to run for office. And it's always nice to get accolades and to have the team acknowledged for their hard work.
Yep.
But the best part about that is that it is the kind of article that people don't give Cosmo credit for doing. Cosmo is diverse, and we have these moments of levity, and we have the serious topics. So that's very organic to the brand, actually.
Coming up, a new era for feminism. How has it changed the conversation for Cosmo and Playboy? What effect do you think your magazine has had on the way women see themselves?
It has had an impact on women having the ability to own their sexuality just as much as their male counterparts.
I think that sexual liberation and empowerment is one aspect of being a feminist, but it's certainly not the whole thing.
Welcome back to The Point. Two legendary brands known for pushing the envelope. How has the new era of female empowerment changed the conversation? What is your definition of feminism? And how did you come to it?
Well, I think it's like I'm sort of a Puritan. It's just about equality. You know, when people say I'm not a feminist, they're saying I'm not for equality. So it's just equality, you know, among the sexes. So for me, it really comes down to that, just having the same opportunity and, you know, being taken seriously and being paid a commensurate salary for the work we do, all of that.
What does it mean to be a feminist today?
I don't necessarily know that I can answer that question as a male, but I will tell you that as I understand it, and it depends on the type of feminist you're talking to, it means equality for women.
What effect do you think your magazine has had on the way women see themselves?
It has had an impact on women having the ability to own their sexuality just as much as their male counterparts.
How has your magazine influenced the way Americans think about sex?
I think that the magazine and the organization as an entirety has brought sex out of the closet. We're in a pretty interesting, I think, crossroad. And I want to say fork in the road, but I think that there's actually more than one path than just two sort of roads to be taken. Look, the consent conversation is incredibly important. The conversation of no consent, I'm talking more about just to the point that you were making, mixology and you know, cars and trying to live the good life. The conversation that is happening around how to have an appropriate conversation in the bedroom or in one's home is a really important conversation to have, and I think for a lot of people, including myself, we view it as a topic that is long overdue.
Do you think that being a feminist is the same thing as being pro-sex?
I think that sexual liberation and empowerment is one aspect of being a feminist, but it's certainly not the whole thing. I think that I'm constantly shocked at how, you know, puritanical we still can be about the topic. You know, it's shocking to me that people get so skittish when talking about sex, or seeing a sex cover line, or reading about it, that tons of people still balk at the idea, like, whoa, you would talk about sex so openly.
Right.
You know, we live in a country that has, you know, horrible sex ed, and and if there is sex ed, it's super clinical, and there's never any discussion of actually like pleasures derived from this activity. And there's some evidence to say that if that topic were covered more, there wouldn't be as many assaults, there wouldn't be as many STIs, there wouldn't be, because the shame around it and the confusion around it and, you know, all that it's shrouded in would fall away. So I think we have so far to go on that front. And in that, we do have a role.
Coming up, how two iconic magazines are balancing their print legacy with a digital future.
We're not just a print magazine. We're everywhere. We're on Snapchat.
Yeah.
We, you know, have a big digital site. We have branded books. We do events.
You're one of the most popular channels on Snapchat, right?
Yes, we do. And we were one of the first on the Discover platform.
What role does Photoshop play? Do you ever think about getting rid of Photoshop?
Yeah, we've actually, since I have stepped in, we have dramatically decreased the use of Photoshop.
Welcome back to The Point. The magazine industry is in a state of flux. Ever-shrinking budgets, consolidations and layoffs, and a culture where ad dollars go to the next big thing. Playboy's Cooper Hefner and Cosmo's Michele Promaulayko tell us how they're keeping their brands on track for the future. What can digital do that print couldn't do? And that's really something that you kind of came of age with the publication.
Sure. Talk to people in real time.
What can print do that digital can't?
I think it depends on the publication, but make people feel as though the news cycle is not minute to minute, but is something that has longevity, whether it's lifestyle or music or, you know, any other component to one's personal and even professional life. But I see us at a moment in time where we're also obsessed with tomorrow and infatuated with the future. So we're sort of in this, specifically when it comes to trends and music and style choices that we're making as a generation. I'm speaking for millennials here. There certainly is a lot of love for yesteryear, but there is a whole lot of fascination with the future, and we blend those two sort of at every turn.
The company is a product monster in a good way, $1.5 billion in merchandise revenue per year at this point.
Well, from a cash standpoint, it certainly is, and looking at the bottom line, it does what it needs to do.
Yeah.
But I have sort of a different take on it based on the fact that I'm the chief creative officer, but also because I'm a Hefner. And what I mean by that is, I don't necessarily look at the product that we're producing as just a licensing agreement or a joint venture opportunity. For me, it's about making sure that there's quality control and making sure that it is directly connected to the philosophy. Because my point of view is that the product sells because people understand the brand and they believe in the message and they want to be a part of it. And the success of that area of the business reflects that.
What role does Photoshop play? Do you ever think about getting rid of Photoshop?
Yeah, we've actually, since I have stepped in, we have dramatically decreased the use of Photoshop. I think years ago, in sort of a rebellious protest, tweeted something along the lines of, well, if I was running a magazine as an editor, I wouldn't necessarily use Photoshop. On the other hand, I did see a very important conversation that was happening among other generations, but I was listening among my generation, and there were concerns about what Photoshop was doing to encourage body positivity, and it wasn't doing much. So we're thoughtful about the use of Photoshop. We understand that there is a fantasy element to the brand.
Yes.
But there is still something to be said about, the collective feeling like Photoshop is a negative. And there are a lot of people that do.
Isn't the battle today to build a great media company for you?
The celebration of individual freedom and the protection of individual freedom. So yes, that, of course, there are business decisions that have to be made in managing a media company or managing a licensing company, but the philosophy here is what has made it sort of the gasoline in the engine.
What can print do that digital can't do?
Obviously, we take more time to put the stories together. We can, travel somewhere to report it. We spend a lot of time fact-checking it.
Yeah. And
we really delve deeper into maybe an aspect of a news story, but it's not the breaking news. It's not, just a summary of what happened. It's exploiting a detail that we think is interesting that deserves to be expanded on. And so we have that ability, and also to, art it in a really conceptual, creative, and lush way.
What can digital do that print can't do?
Break news.
Okay.
For Cosmo, we exist on every platform, right? So we're not just a print magazine. We're everywhere. We're on Snapchat.
Yeah.
We, have a big digital site. We have branded books. We do events.
You have one of the most popular channels on Snapchat, right?
Yes, we do. And we were one of the first on the Discover platform.
Yes.
And obviously, our readers are young and, native to that platform. So that works for us, and it's been great. So we're diversified in that way, and so if you want to interact with the Cosmo brand, you can do it in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be print, doesn't have to be Snapchat. But to your point about being the creator versus the business side, we work in lockstep more than ever before. So it's really, serving both sides, serving the reader and serving the clients that allow us to keep the lights on. So, but doing that in a very authentic way, and there's a lot of discussion around that, and a lot of, meetings and, times that we disagree. But that's critical to our survival.
The magazine industry faces many challenges over the next few years, from changes in how consumers access content to changes in how advertisers reach audiences. For these two legendary brands, reaching the audiences of the future means doing what they've always done, which is to be at the forefront of social change. And while they come from two different perspectives, the point is that they always lead the conversation. That does it for this week's episode of The Point. Join us for another great topic next week.